as I've continued to say to myself, and whatever I'm going through, my faith is greater than my fear. I believe in myself.
Have you ever wondered what would happen if a figure from Meghan Markle's past suddenly stepped forward and challenged the story that millions of people around the world believe they already know? According to supporters of a growing royal narrative, that exact scenario allegedly unfolded when Trevor Engelson, Meghan's former husband and a longtime Hollywood producer, unexpectedly found himself at the center of an international media storm. For years, Trevor had remained largely silent while Meghan transformed from a television actress into one of the most recognizable women in the world. He rarely granted interviews. He rarely discussed their marriage. And he appeared content to remain far removed from royal controversy. Yet according to the story, everything changed when he allegedly decided that remaining silent was no longer an option. What followed would reportedly trigger a chain reaction stretching from Hollywood to California and all the way to Buckingham Palace itself, creating one of the most explosive controversies the Sussex family had allegedly faced in years. According to supporters of the narrative, the first shock came when Trevor reportedly appeared during a televised interview and began discussing aspects of his former marriage that he had never previously shared in public. The appearance immediately attracted attention. Not because Trevor was known for controversy, but because he had spent so many years avoiding it. Many observers assumed he would continue maintaining his silence forever. Instead, according to the story, he allegedly delivered a series of claims that instantly ignited headlines across social media and royal discussion forums. According to the narrative, Trevor began by revisiting the early years of his relationship with Meghan, describing a marriage that supporters of the story claimed deteriorated much faster than either of them initially expected. The couple married in 2011, but as Meghan's acting career continued developing, their lives reportedly began moving in different directions. Long periods apart, different professional ambitions, and growing tensions allegedly created strain that became increasingly difficult to overcome. While such challenges are hardly unusual in modern relationships, supporters of the narrative argue that Trevor's account focused less on distance and more on what he described as a pattern of relentless ambition that eventually overwhelmed the marriage. What made the interview especially controversial was the way Trevor allegedly characterized Meghan's motivations. According to supporters of the story, he did not describe her as merely ambitious. He described her as relentlessly ambitious, someone constantly searching for the next opportunity, the next connection, and the next step upward. Whether those characterizations are fair remains impossible to independently verify. Yet within the narrative, those comments immediately became the focus of public attention. According to the story, Trevor allegedly claimed that Meghan frequently encouraged him to use his professional influence to advance her career. As an established producer with industry contacts throughout Hollywood, he reportedly possessed relationships that many aspiring performers would find valuable. Supporters of the narrative claim that Trevor described repeated efforts to secure introductions, opportunities, and meetings capable of helping Meghan expand her professional profile. While critics of the narrative note that networking is common throughout the entertainment industry, supporters argue that Trevor presented these requests as evidence of a broader determination to achieve fame and influence regardless of the personal costs involved. As the interview continued, the discussion allegedly became even more dramatic, because Trevor reportedly shifted his attention away from the past and toward Prince Harry. According to supporters of the narrative, this was the moment that transformed the interview from a discussion about a former marriage into a story involving the future of the Sussex family itself. Trevor allegedly suggested that Harry faced challenges remarkably similar to those he himself had once experienced. Challenges involving trust, influence, and competing priorities within a relationship. According to the story, Trevor offered a particularly controversial prediction regarding the future of Harry and Meghan's marriage. Supporters of the narrative claim that he argued the relationship could face serious strain if circumstances surrounding royal titles, public influence, or commercial opportunities changed significantly. Whether such predictions carried any factual basis remains unknown. Nevertheless, the remarks immediately generated intense discussion because they appeared to suggest that Meghan's long-term priorities might differ from the public image often presented by the couple. What made these comments so explosive was not simply their content. It was their source. Trevor was not a royal commentator. He was not a tabloid columnist. And he was not an anonymous social media account. He was Meghan's former husband, someone who had known her long before royal titles entered the picture. According to supporters of the narrative, this connection gave his words a level of credibility that many critics and supporters alike found difficult to ignore. Media outlets began dissecting every statement. Royal observers debated his motives. Social media users argued over whether he was revealing uncomfortable truths or simply reopening old wounds. Regardless of where people stood, one fact became impossible to deny: Trevor's comments had succeeded in dominating the conversation. According to the story, however, the interview itself was only the beginning. Because while Trevor's accusations generated immediate controversy, an even larger conflict allegedly erupted once Meghan became aware of what had been said. Supporters of the narrative claim that she reacted with fury, rejecting the allegations and questioning Trevor's credibility in unusually direct terms. What followed would reportedly transform a single television appearance into a full-scale media war, drawing new participants into the dispute, generating fresh allegations, and eventually forcing Buckingham Palace to confront a controversy it allegedly could no longer ignore. According to supporters of the narrative, the controversy allegedly intensified dramatically after Trevor Engelson's interview because what had initially appeared to be a single television appearance quickly evolved into a much larger public confrontation, drawing widespread media attention and placing Meghan Markle under a level of scrutiny that supporters of the story claim she had not experienced in years. While Trevor's comments alone generated headlines, the real crisis reportedly began when discussions moved beyond his personal opinions and started focusing on whether additional information from Meghan's past might soon emerge. According to many commentators following the narrative, that possibility transformed an uncomfortable interview into a developing media storm with potentially serious implications for both Meghan and Prince Harry. According to the story, Meghan was allegedly furious when details of Trevor's remarks began spreading across newspapers, television programs, podcasts, and social media platforms around the world. Not simply because an ex-husband had spoken publicly, but because supporters of the narrative claim he had challenged the image she had spent years carefully building. An image centered on resilience, independence, and personal authenticity. According to supporters of the story, Meghan reportedly viewed Trevor's allegations as a deliberate attempt to undermine her credibility by presenting a version of events that directly contradicted the public perception many people had formed over the years. What made the situation especially volatile was that Trevor allegedly refused to back away from his comments. According to the narrative, he did not issue clarifications, he did not apologize, and he did not attempt to soften his criticisms. Instead, supporters of the story claim that he continued discussing the subject through additional interviews and private conversations that gradually found their way into public discussion. According to many royal observers, this persistence helped keep the controversy alive long after most celebrity disputes would normally have faded from public attention. Each new comment generated additional headlines. Each headline generated new debates, and each debate encouraged reporters to dig deeper into Meghan's past relationships, professional ambitions, and personal history. Supporters of the narrative argue that the result was a cycle that neither side seemed capable of stopping. According to the story, matters became even more complicated when rumors began circulating about the existence of private communications allegedly connected to Meghan's early career. Not official documents, not legal records, but personal messages that supporters of the narrative claimed could potentially support portions of Trevor's account if they were ever made public. Whether such messages actually existed remained unclear. Yet the speculation alone reportedly generated enormous interest. According to supporters of the narrative, journalists, bloggers, and royal commentators immediately began searching for evidence capable of confirming or disproving the claims. Some dismissed the rumors entirely. Others argued that additional revelations were inevitable. Regardless of where observers stood, the discussion allegedly shifted from Trevor's opinions to the possibility of new information emerging from unexpected sources. What makes this stage of the narrative particularly dramatic is the effect it allegedly had on Buckingham Palace. Because according to supporters of the story, the palace had no direct role in Trevor's allegations, no control over his interviews, and no ability to prevent media speculation. Yet the institution itself was reportedly being drawn into the controversy. every headline mentioning Meghan eventually mentioned Harry, and every headline mentioning Harry eventually mentioned the royal family. According to many commentators, palace officials allegedly became increasingly concerned about the direction of the public conversation because the controversy was beginning to revive old debates regarding the Sussexes' departure from royal life, their relationship with the monarchy, and the long-running tensions that had dominated headlines for years. Supporters of the narrative argue that officials feared the situation could evolve into another prolonged, public battle capable of damaging both family relationships and institutional reputation. According to the story, Trevor's critics responded aggressively. Some accused him of seeking publicity, others questioned his motives, and still others argued that he was exploiting a former relationship for personal attention. Supporters of the narrative claim that these attacks only strengthened Trevor's determination to continue speaking because he reportedly viewed the criticism as proof that certain topics remained too uncomfortable for people to discuss openly. Whether that interpretation was correct remains impossible to verify. Yet within the narrative, the conflict continued escalating. According to supporters of the story, the most significant development occurred when reports surfaced suggesting that individuals who had known Meghan before her relationship with Prince Harry might also be considering speaking publicly. Some were described as former friends. Others were described as professional acquaintances. None had yet made definitive statements, but according to the narrative, the possibility alone created enormous uncertainty because it suggested that Trevor might not remain the only voice challenging Meghan's version of events. What allegedly worried observers most was the effect on Prince Harry. According to many commentators, following the narrative, Harry found himself trapped in an increasingly difficult position. Defending his wife risked intensifying the controversy. Remaining silent risked encouraging further speculation. And publicly attacking Trevor could potentially draw even more attention to the allegations. Supporters of the narrative argue that every available option carried consequences. As a result, the pressure reportedly continued mounting. According to the story, by the time the controversy entered its next phase, the dispute had already expanded far beyond a former marriage. It now involved questions about trust, reputation, media influence, and the future relationship between the Sussexes and the monarchy. Yet supporters of the narrative claim that the most explosive revelations had not yet emerged. Because just as the media war reached its peak, reports allegedly began circulating about private messages, confidential conversations, and information from a former friend whose claims threatened to push the controversy into entirely new territory. And according to many observers, those developments would soon force Buckingham Palace to consider responses it had hoped never to make. According to supporters of the narrative, the controversy allegedly entered its most dangerous phase when reports began circulating about a collection of private messages that, if authentic, had the potential to transform a public disagreement between Meghan Markle and her former husband into a crisis involving the royal family itself. Because while Trevor Engelson's earlier interviews had largely consisted of personal observations, opinions, and interpretations of events from the past, these newly rumored communications were described as something entirely different, direct evidence that could allegedly support some of the claims he had been making for weeks. And according to many commentators following the story, the mere possibility that such material existed was enough to send shockwaves through both royal circles and the international media. According to the story, speculation began after several entertainment reporters claimed they had been contacted by individuals familiar with Meghan's early Hollywood years, individuals who allegedly suggested that old communications, conversations, and personal exchanges had been preserved for years and might soon become public. Nobody knew exactly what the messages contained. Nobody knew who possessed them. And nobody knew whether they would ever be released. Yet supporters of the narrative claim that the uncertainty itself became a major problem because journalists immediately began investigating every possible lead, creating a frenzy of speculation that rapidly spread across television networks, podcasts, social media platforms, and royal discussion forums around the world. According to many observers, the situation allegedly became even more explosive when Trevor reportedly hinted during a follow-up interview that certain information existed which he had intentionally chosen not to discuss publicly in the past, a remark that supporters of the narrative interpreted as a signal that additional revelations might still be coming, thereby fueling even greater curiosity about what had remained hidden for so many years. While Trevor reportedly stopped short of confirming specific details, commentators claim that his carefully chosen words encouraged widespread speculation that the dispute was far from over. What made this stage of the narrative especially dramatic was the alleged reaction from Meghan's camp. According to supporters of the story, there was growing frustration, growing concern, and growing determination to challenge what they viewed as a coordinated effort to damage her reputation. Supporters of the narrative claim that Meghan's allies privately dismissed the allegations as misleading and unfair, arguing that critics were deliberately constructing a negative portrait of a woman whose success had already made her a target for years. Yet despite those efforts, the controversy reportedly continued expanding because public attention remained focused not on denials, but on what new information might emerge next. According to the story, Buckingham Palace allegedly began monitoring the situation more closely as headlines grew increasingly sensational, not because the institution had any direct involvement in the dispute, but because every development inevitably drew Prince Harry and the monarchy back into the center of the conversation. Supporters of the narrative argue that palace officials feared the story was beginning to evolve beyond a celebrity controversy and into a broader debate about the Sussex's relationship with the royal family, a topic that had already generated years of tension and negative publicity. According to many commentators, the real turning point arrived when a former acquaintance of Meghan allegedly emerged with claims of her own. Not a family member, not a royal insider, but someone reportedly connected to Meghan's pre-royal social circle. According to supporters of the narrative, this individual claimed to possess first-hand knowledge of conversations dating back years. Conversations that allegedly painted a very different picture from the one presented publicly. Whether those claims were accurate remained impossible to verify. Yet their emergence dramatically intensified the controversy. According to the story, reporters immediately began pursuing the former acquaintance, hoping to obtain interviews, documents, photographs, or any material capable of supporting the allegations. Some media outlets reportedly described the individual as a potentially crucial witness in the growing dispute, while others questioned both the timing and the credibility of the claims. Nevertheless, supporters of the narrative argue that the damage was already being done because each new accusation generated fresh headlines and kept the controversy alive. What allegedly troubled observers most was the effect the situation was having on Prince Harry. According to many royal commentators, Harry found himself increasingly isolated, caught between loyalty to his wife and the growing volume of accusations appearing in public. Every day seemed to bring another headline, another rumor, or another allegation, and supporters of the narrative claim that the pressure surrounding the couple was beginning to reach extraordinary levels. According to the story, questions reportedly emerged about whether Harry had been aware of certain aspects of Meghan's past relationships, professional ambitions, or private conversations that were now becoming subjects of public debate. Supporters of the narrative argue that these questions placed him in an extremely uncomfortable position because answering them risked fueling the controversy further, while ignoring them allowed speculation to continue unchecked. Either choice carried consequences. According to many observers, by this point the dispute had grown far beyond Trevor Engelson himself. It was no longer merely a story about an ex-husband speaking out. It had become a broader crisis involving former friends, alleged private messages, escalating media coverage, and increasing pressure on the Sussex household. Yet supporters of the narrative claim that the most consequential development was still ahead, because as palace officials allegedly assessed the growing fallout and considered its potential impact on the monarchy, discussions reportedly began taking place behind closed doors about whether stronger action would be necessary. And according to the story, those discussions would eventually lead to an extraordinary ultimatum that threatened to reshape the future relationship between Harry, Meghan, and Buckingham Palace forever. According to supporters of the narrative, the controversy allegedly reached a critical stage when discussions that had previously been confined to media outlets, social networks, and celebrity commentators reportedly began attracting the attention of senior figures within Buckingham Palace, because while the monarchy had spent years attempting to distance itself from disputes involving the Sussexes, the growing scale of the allegations and the increasingly intense public reaction supposedly made complete silence difficult to maintain. What had started as Trevor Engelson speaking about his former marriage had now evolved into a story involving alleged private messages, former friends, conflicting narratives, and questions that were beginning to affect public perceptions of the royal family itself. According to the story, palace officials allegedly became particularly concerned about the speed with which the controversy was expanding. Every day brought new headlines. Every headline generated new speculation. And every new rumor seemed to create another cycle of public debate. Supporters of the narrative claim that advisors feared the situation could spiral into a prolonged media battle capable of dominating news coverage for months, thereby reopening old divisions that the monarchy had spent years attempting to move beyond. According to many commentators following the narrative, the most dramatic development allegedly occurred when additional claims surfaced from a former friend of Meghan who reportedly decided to speak publicly after seeing Trevor's interviews and the growing discussion surrounding them. Supporters of the story argue that this individual claimed to possess personal knowledge of conversations dating back many years and allegedly suggested that Trevor's version of events was not entirely inconsistent with experiences she herself remembered. Whether those statements were accurate remains impossible to independently verify. Nevertheless, according to the narrative, their appearance dramatically intensified public interest because they seemed to suggest that Trevor was no longer standing alone. What made the stage especially explosive was the alleged emergence of photographs and archived communications. Not official palace documents, not government records, but personal material. Material that supporters of the narrative claimed could potentially support parts of the broader story being constructed around Meghan's ambitions and long-term goals. According to the narrative, the contents were heavily debated, the interpretations differed wildly, and no consensus emerged. Yet the controversy continued growing regardless. According to supporters of the story, media organizations began competing aggressively to obtain exclusive interviews, additional evidence, and insider accounts connected to the unfolding dispute. Some outlets reportedly framed the allegations as a serious challenge to Meghan's credibility, while others argued that the claims were being exaggerated by critics determined to damage her reputation. The result was a deeply polarized public debate in which almost every new development was interpreted in completely different ways depending on the perspective of the observer. According to many royal observers, Prince Harry allegedly found himself under extraordinary pressure during this period because the controversy increasingly revolved around questions that directly affected his personal life. Questions about trust, questions about loyalty, and questions about whether he had been fully aware of aspects of Meghan's past that were now becoming subjects of public discussion. Supporters of the narrative claim that these questions created a difficult situation because remaining silent encouraged speculation, while responding publicly risked extending the controversy even further. According to the story, palace advisors allegedly began discussing how future interactions between the monarchy and the Sussexes might be affected if the situation continued escalating. Supporters of the narrative argue that officials were less concerned about individual allegations than about the cumulative effect of constant controversy on the institution's reputation. Every new dispute involving Harry and Meghan inevitably generated headlines linking them back to the monarchy, regardless of whether the palace had any direct involvement. As a result, some commentators claim that internal discussions increasingly focused on establishing clearer boundaries regarding future relationships and public associations. What makes this chapter particularly dramatic is the growing perception that a decisive moment was approaching. Not because anyone had proven every allegation, not because definitive evidence had emerged, but because the controversy itself had become difficult to contain. According to supporters of the narrative, the issue was no longer Trevor Engelson. The issue was momentum. Each new revelation, each new interview, and each new claim appeared to push the story further forward. According to many commentators, by the time these discussions were allegedly taking place, public attention had reached extraordinary levels. Royal watchers debated possible outcomes. Supporters and critics of Meghan argued fiercely online. And speculation intensified regarding how Buckingham Palace might respond if the controversy continued expanding. Supporters of the narrative claim that senior figures increasingly believed some form of action would eventually become necessary, not to settle the allegations themselves but to protect the institution from being drawn deeper into the conflict. According to the story, The situation ultimately brought Harry to a deeply uncomfortable crossroads. For years, he had defended Meghan against criticism, challenged media narratives, and publicly supported their shared decisions. Yet supporters of the narrative argue that the growing volume of accusations, combined with the appearance of former friends and alleged private communications, reportedly created questions that could no longer be dismissed as easily as before. Whether those questions were justified remains uncertain, but within the narrative they became impossible to ignore. According to supporters of the story, this mounting pressure allegedly set the stage for the most consequential chapter of all. Because as palace discussions intensified and public scrutiny continued growing, reports began circulating that Buckingham Palace was considering a firm ultimatum regarding its future relationship with the Sussexes. And according to many commentators following the narrative, that alleged ultimatum would soon force Harry and Meghan to confront choices capable of reshaping their future, their public standing, and whatever connection remained between them and the institution they left behind. According to supporters of the narrative, the final chapter allegedly began when Buckingham Palace concluded that remaining silent was no longer a viable option, because after weeks of escalating accusations, media speculation, alleged private messages, and increasingly public disputes involving Trevor Engelson, former acquaintances, and the Sussex household, the controversy had reportedly grown too large to ignore. While the monarchy had spent years attempting to create distance between itself and the ongoing drama surrounding Harry and Meghan, supporters of the story claimed that palace officials now feared the institution itself was becoming the central focus of the scandal, forcing senior figures to consider actions they had long hoped to avoid. According to the narrative, discussions inside royal circles allegedly centered on a simple but critical question: how could the monarchy protect its reputation without becoming directly involved in a personal dispute? Supporters of the story claim that advisors increasingly believed stronger boundaries were necessary because every new allegation, whether verified or unverified, continued generating headlines linking the royal family to controversies it neither controlled nor initiated. As a result, the pressure reportedly intensified with each passing day. According to many commentators following the narrative, reports soon emerged suggesting that Buckingham Palace was considering a firm ultimatum regarding future use of royal branding, titles, and public associations connected to the Sussexes. Supporters of the narrative argue that these discussions were allegedly driven not by any single accusation, but by the cumulative effect of years of conflict, media battles, and reputational challenges that had repeatedly placed the institution in uncomfortable positions. Whether such conversations actually occurred remains impossible to independently verify, yet within the narrative they became the centerpiece of the final confrontation. What makes this stage of the story particularly dramatic is the position in which Meghan allegedly found herself. On one side, there were growing public questions. On another, there were claims from Trevor Engelson and others. And beyond that, there was the possibility of increasing separation from the institution that had once provided global visibility and influence. According to supporters of the narrative, the combination created extraordinary pressure because every available response seemed to carry risks. According to the story, Prince Harry allegedly faced an equally difficult situation. For years, he had defended Meghan publicly, challenged criticism directed toward her, and presented a united front against what he believed were unfair attacks. Yet supporters of the narrative claim that the latest controversy placed him under a different kind of strain because the accusations were now coming from individuals connected to Meghan's life before the royal family, making them more difficult to dismiss as simply another chapter in a long-running dispute between the Sussexes and the British press. According to many observers, Trevor Engelson's role in the story also changed significantly during this period. He was no longer viewed merely as an ex-husband. He had become a central figure in a global media narrative. Publishers reportedly expressed interest. Commentators analyzed his statements, and speculation grew regarding whether he might eventually reveal even more information about his experiences. Supporters of the narrative argue that this possibility further intensified concern among those already worried about the direction of the controversy. According to the story, public reaction became increasingly polarized. Some people viewed Trevor as someone finally telling his side of a story that had remained hidden for years. Others believed he was revisiting old grievances and benefiting from renewed attention. Supporters and critics of Meghan continued debating every development, ensuring that the controversy remained at the center of online discussion long after it first emerged. What makes the ending especially significant is that the narrative ultimately revolves around reputation. Not simply personal reputation, but institutional reputation, family reputation, and public trust. According to supporters of a story, the monarchy's primary concern was never the details of individual allegations. It was the broader question of how those allegations affected public perceptions of the crown itself. That concern allegedly shaped every discussion and every decision that followed. According to many commentators, the larger lesson within the narrative is about the consequences of unresolved conflict. Relationships end, disagreements emerge, and public figures often find themselves confronting stories from their past when they least expect it. Supporters of the narrative argue that the controversy demonstrates how quickly private history can become public controversy when powerful personalities, global media attention, and long-standing family tensions collide. According to the story, by the time the dust finally began to settle, no clear winners had emerged. The Sussexes remained under scrutiny. The monarchy remained linked to headlines it wanted to avoid, and public debate continued. Yet one thing had undeniably changed. Questions that had once existed only in speculation were now being discussed openly around the world. Whether those discussions would ultimately help or harm the people involved remained uncertain. According to supporters of a narrative, that uncertainty is precisely what keeps the story alive. The controversy touches on ambition, loyalty, trust, reputation, and family relationships, subjects that continue to fascinate audiences regardless of where they stand on the individuals involved. And as long as unanswered questions remain, supporters of the story believe the debate is unlikely to disappear completely. So what do you think? Should Buckingham Palace distance itself completely from controversies involving Harry and Meghan, or does the royal family have a responsibility to remain connected regardless of public disputes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage of Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, King Charles III, and the ongoing story surrounding the British royal family. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.